Hello, I'm Janet Bridgers with Earth Alert. We're very pleased to bring you the following documentary to show you something that we've known for a long time, and that is that Ventura County's Ormond Beach is a very special place. We hope you'll enjoy the documentary and also that you'll help join in our efforts to preserve Ormond Beach.
Every day, thousands of people drive on Hueneme Road, the California state road that connects the port of Hueneme to California's Highway 1. Very few drivers are aware of the rare treasure at Ormond Beach, just a short distance behind the patchwork of industrial, agricultural, and port-related businesses that line the road. But to those who know, Ormond Beach is an extraordinary place, a biological wonderland, with a stunning ecosystem that combines ocean, sandy beach, estuary, marsh, dunes, and uplands. The 2-mile stretch of beach and adjacent wetlands that lies between the Port Mucoo Naval Air Station and the Port Hueneme Pier provides habitat to dozens of endangered, threatened, or other special status species. As many as 300 bird species have been sighted here. Many of them migrate the Pacific Flyway as they have since the last ice age. At Ormond Beach, the birds still find a place where they can live as nature intended, amidst a landscape of marshes and wind-sculpted dunes.
When you think about it, with over 90% of our wetlands already destroyed and lost forever, the wetlands become more and more precious. And Ormond Beach is the premier wetlands north of Los Angeles, going up the coast here in the Central Coast. I mean, the premier wetlands, and it can support, it can be a vital support for the ecology, for habitat restoration.
Dan Pearson, a marine mammal rescue expert, remembers how Ormond Beach was in the 1950s when he and his family came to live in the area.
1954, moved here when I was just a small child. My dad was in the Air Force, and I was 7 years old. I think it was in September. And I had never lived on the coast before from Texas, and this was just fantastic. And so every day after school, you know, we're done with stuff, just go to the beach and wander up and down. And it was relatively uninhabited. It was just pure wilderness at the time.
So I'd walk down to where the old pier was, not far from where the new pier is now. And then I'd walk off towards Point Mucoo. But as I walked down towards Point Mucoo, I passed all this I guess I walked through an at least turned nesting area. And there were thousands of birds, thousands and thousands. I mean, the noise was incredible. And as I approached, they would take off, or some of them would do the dragging wing thing, you know, to lead you away from their nest. And when they went up above me, I mean, you could barely see the sky. There was just, I'm literally tens of thousands of birds on that beach that were nesting. I thought it was wonderful because the only time I'd seen anything like that before was on Walt Disney nature episodes. I thought, well, isn't this fantastic? You know, so you could see the little eggs and you could see the life and everything going on, and I thought it was just wonderful. And I had, I guess, an appreciation for it that perhaps most 7-year-olds wouldn't have. I don't know, but I was very much tuned into it.
Decades later, after the city of Oxnard's permitting decisions allowed the area to become industrialized in the 1960s, wetlands biologist Wayne Farron still found the area remarkable, but affected.
It was fairly early in my study of the West to visit the area, and I was impressed with its size. I was impressed with the diversity and with the impacts that were so obvious there. And yet, in spite of the somewhat profound effects that were visible, there was a resilience. And that, I think, is the story of Ormond, the fact that nature finds a way sometimes in spite of all the things that we may do. And so endangered plants and animals survive. And we have an opportunity to enhance this refuge to make it better.
Oxnard's industrialization of the area isolated the dunes and wetlands of Ormond from most human traffic and allowed the area to continue to support many plant and animal species that previously were found in coastal wetlands from Point Conception to the Mexican border. Most other Southern California coastal wetlands have been developed.
And so we have lost 75 to 95% of them. And in that loss, those which are left are often left to a few habitats, and not always as diverse as what we have at Ormond.
Perhaps if the importance of coastal wetlands had been widely known earlier, more of them would have been preserved. But their widespread destruction makes the ones that remain all the more important.
For humans, it provides both fisheries and recreational opportunities, and certainly for the Native Americans, cultural benefits for native plants and animals. So there are a wide array of benefits and services for the earth and for humans. And we have a number of areas in Southern California that have beach closures from Santa Barbara on south, and often this is due to the fact that the wetlands have been filled to the point that our stormwater simply comes right from the streets, right into the ocean, and provides at least periodic pollution, where if we had larger wetlands, as we did historically, we might very well have this biofiltration to be able to accommodate water purification and cleaner beaches. So there's all sorts of links, and we reach a point in which we have beach closures, we have, higher pollution issues, we have needs that have to be met in order to survive on the coast.
The ecosystem at Ormond has a wide array of features that the other existing coastal wetlands no longer have.
The fact that it has low elevation agricultural lands, fairly extensive around it, is unique because most of our wetlands have development right up to the edge and into the remaining small portions of estuaries. Ormond Beach has acres of undeveloped agricultural lands that actually could be the future for the landward migration of wetlands as sea level rise may occur with global climate change. It is significant and unique virtually because of that, since most of the wetlands are surrounded by railroads, highways, housing developments, urbanization in general.
And yet, as valuable as many now acknowledge wetlands to be, the pressure to marginalize their viability continues with development that comes ever closer to their edges.
Ormond Beach is more than about the wetlands, because another aspect of Ormond that's important is that we have a dune system intact. We have some adjacent palustrine wetlands. We have a diversity of habitats that support a diversity of plants and animals. Some of these are mudflat and mudflat communities of plants and or animals. We have intertidal salt marsh, brackish water marsh with bulrushes and cattails, some freshwater marsh with some similar emergent wetland. There are subtidal channels. There is a beach lagoon area. In fact, what we see are remnants of this larger estuary that extended all the way to and beyond Hueneme Road. It was a substantial ecosystem and part of the Oxnard Plain group of coastal wetlands. And so this, we have the beach community, which supports rare globose dune beetles. We have habitats for wildlife that we'll probably talk about in a minute. But this combination of dune and dune seep, brackish edges, salt marsh, mud flats, the palustrine edges, channels, the diversity of the plants and animals we see reflect the fact that there's this complex of smaller habitats within the broader ecosystem.
It is this array of natural features that explains why an astounding number of species can be found here, either as residents or migrating guests.
But I think we need to keep in mind that we have to have a regional perspective, and where does Ormond fit into the context of other sites such as Bionda Wetlands nearby, or all the way up to Carpinteria Salt Marsh in Santa Barbara County, down to the San Diego group of estuaries. And the functions that are especially endemic to that area, we want to be able to preserve. And how do we do it regionally? And Ormond, in that case, will play a major role in the regional sustainability and recovery of these various functions.
The range of features at Ormond make it extremely important from a regional perspective and not just locally.
But Ormond, on the other hand, has so many significant remaining functions that it may be one of those that can support a broader array than some other estuaries, which may support one or two well, but not the broader array of them. So scale, size has something to do with it. Ormond being larger as a remnant certainly has greater capacity, and it gives us a chance to think about how we may put the pieces back together.
From a worldwide perspective, Southern California's Mediterranean climate presents a fairly rare combination of physical characteristics fostering unique biological adaptations found only in Southern California marshes.
Well, these fluctuating zones along the edge of the estuary are found only in Mediterranean climates, where we have winter rains that produce enough rainfall that it reduces the salinity. That allows rare annual plants to grow during low salinity. They grow, flower, produce seed, and die as summer hypersalinity increases with evaporation. And so this special zone along the edge of the estuaries is extremely important for supporting these rare plants and animals, and some of the animals as well, but especially the rare annuals that only grow in that environment. And so Ormond Beach has some of them, and other estuaries in the region. Unfortunately, those are often higher and drier, and the first places to be filled in and built on for parking lots, airports. Airports all over the world are building coastal marshes often and in estuaries because they're flat, large areas that you would need for them. And so these rare habitats are often some of the first ones to be eliminated.
Ormond's range of features is a marvelous demonstration that many life forms, many species, live at the edge where one habitat type meets another.
You have salt marsh harvest mice, salt marsh shrews that occur in some of these transition zones. And for some of the plants and some of the animals that occur down in salt marsh environments, the fluctuating tides, the high tide, low tide areas in these marshes, find as refuges these higher transition zones during extreme high tides or during storm tides. So one of the things that is important about the transition zones, including these fluctuating salinity zones, is for biodiversity, refuges, important areas that it's not just the lower tidal salt marshes that we think of with estuaries with a combination of regular tidal flushing or irregular flushing, but it's all these peripheral areas that provide the support as refuges, areas with endemism, and that are often lost. And so if we have only the lower salt marsh preserved, you've lost most of the biodiversity, perhaps, of the ecosystem without the peripheral areas that are so important.
Close by, a change in salinity provided by the input of fresh water offers a different environment, the brackish marsh.
We have a lot of fresh water coming in, and those brackish marshes occur in a mixing zone where if you have enough fresh water coming into an estuary that's open with tidal salt water coming in, then you have a salinity that is less than seawater, regularly enough to support cattails and bulrushes and plants that we think of as brackish. What separates a estuary and its wetlands from adjacent areas is often considered to be the salinity of 0.5 parts per thousand. The background salinity in the landscape may be less than 0.5 parts per thousand or thereabouts, but any more than 0.5 is suggesting that it is, in fact, derived from the ocean, and therefore salt marsh, or the salinity especially is around 35 parts per thousand, it's ocean. So somewhere between 35 and 0.5 is brackish. And in many estuaries, you have that mixing of salt water and fresh water, giving you that brackish salinity. And that supports plants and animals different than perhaps would be in more saltwater areas.
A third environment is the freshwater marsh.
Here we have very little fresh water coming out many times, and so we have a confined area of salt and brackish marsh and then freshwater marshes nearby. Very few examples of tidal freshwater. But those freshwater marshes are important for other breeding birds and for other functions as well. And in a healthy integrated ecosystem, you would expect to find a combination of freshwater marshes, riparian forests and scrublands, freshwater seeps and springs, brackish marshes, salt marshes, hypersaline marshes, mudflats. And back to Ormond, many of these things still exist in the area. We have our brackish marshes, you have salt marshes, hypersaline areas, dune and beach areas. So the fact that it has all of those is an important element.
Between the marshes and the shore are Ormond's beautiful coastal foredunes, some of the few remaining in Central and Southern California, where most beaches are groomed for human recreational use. Beach grooming removes driftwood and other natural and man-made material that collects on an ungroomed beach. It is in what humans consider debris that tiny shorebirds nest and forage, particularly the western snowy plover.
This preserved, intact portion of the coast provides breeding habitat for shorebirds such as the snowy plover, which is very vulnerable to loss of shoreline, to shoreline erosion issues, beach access and recreational issues, vehicles running over chicks and eggs, and predation by increasing numbers of crows.
Western snowy plovers are an extremely endangered bird because they nest in the sand on ungroomed beaches. The chicks are precocious, meaning that they immediately begin to forage on their own. This makes them particularly vulnerable to off-leash dogs, joggers, and illegal off-road vehicles that still occasionally find their way to the wet sand.
Well, they can be impacted by big storms that can wipe out the nesting area, as I said, a lot of recreational activities. Beach grooming is enormously effective in eliminating populations of shorebirds because highly groomed beaches, like some of our urbanized beach areas that are important for recreation, are groomed with tractors eliminating wrack and cleaning them up on a regular basis. There's no way to support beach nesting birds or birds that even feed in the area, because it's the decomposing kelp often in the beach that produces the nutrients that provides the food chain support for all the invertebrates in the wet sand. And so if you eliminate the food source for the invertebrates, you're also eliminating the food source for the birds that eat them. And so it's this interesting element of urbanization, recreation, beach grooming, all sorts of impacts, even shoreline erosion in some areas, or the development of our beaches with bulkheads, and ultimately sea level rise, perhaps with global climate change. There are lots of issues related to survival on the beach. And I think our certainly keystone species for this could be thought of our snowy plovers, which we do have success stories, certainly at places like Colo Point Reserve at UC Santa Barbara, where beach management has focused on providing habitat for them. And you have a wonderfully recovered population there. Here at Ormond, we actually have a persisting population, but there are demands and challenges with beach access and other issues.
Another very vulnerable species at Ormond is the California least tern, a migrating species that spends winters in Costa Rica, then returns to Southern California beaches to breed in summer. It nests in the sand dunes.
So it's very challenging, with many competitive activities for the same space. And various places in the world will have seasonally fenced off beaches for having the seasonal activity of breeding, so that they can at least breed, and then as the chicks mature they can forage and perhaps manage with the other habitats that are there. But the breeding element is very important and very difficult to achieve given the shoreline conditions throughout Southern California today.
There aren't many beaches where least terns have enough privacy to remain on their nests until eggs hatch. Ormond is one of the few public beaches in Southern and Central California where they can still find this privacy. Another endangered bird found at Ormond is the Belding savanna sparrow, which nests in the pickleweed behind the dunes.
They are endemic to the California estuarine province that extends from Santa Barbara down toward San Quintin and Baja. And they're found only in salt marshes. Now, by stating that, what I mean is that they breed, as far as we know, in the tidal pickleweed habitat. And pickleweed is Sarcocornea virginica, the Latin name for this plant that grows in salt water. And these little birds nest at some of the higher elements of it, so they're not completely inundated all the time with salt water. And they hide their nests in some of these higher transitional pickleweed areas. They usually don't breed in non-tidal pickleweed. So you might have impounded portions of estuaries. And a lot of our salt marshes, estuaries, have dikes and various impoundments where you have areas that are no longer tidally influenced. And that changes the environment entirely. It may have pickleweed surviving, but it doesn't get flushed with the tides, doesn't get the same kind of nutrient embellishments, and it diminishes the importance for some of that. So the vegetation may appear to be everywhere, but not necessarily the breeding habitat.
Coming to Ormond at various times of the year offers opportunities to see other rare species.
So we have kind of the large capital E endangered, state or federal listed, and then we have those which we may call endangered or threatened, which perhaps aren't listed but in technical terms, but may be on Native Plant Society or Audubon lists of plants and birds of concern. And so there are many different ranges of threatened and endangered. Sometimes it's a political issue of getting something listed or not. So there's actually a larger list of animals of concern than what might be those which are actually listed. But we do have quite a few that either are known to be in the region of Ormond Beach or might make use of it in the future. Bald eagles, of course, are quite interesting and are having recovery successes on some of our coastal islands. And one hopes that with restored marshes along the coast, we might see more of these birds that are known to prey on fish more. We do have some of our fishing hawks, for example, which are seen here in winter, and we have seasonal use of the estuaries. So there's a whole suite of birds that are sometimes federally listed and of greater concern and have political ramifications, and then a whole suite of birds that are of concern nonetheless and declining in number, increasing concern as habitats are impacted. So and of course these are all part of the broader biodiversity issues for our estuaries, and they support a huge diversity of migratory birds, which may not breed here, but nonetheless the habitats are important for. And so we have visiting birds of concern, and we have resident birds like Belting savanna sparrow we spoke of. And then we have those that may use the area incidentally, like peregrines that cover a broad range, and in that range is happens to be the Ormond Beach area. So there's lots of different use by sensitive birds, whether they're resident, migratory, incidental, and places with enough landscape preserve, like at Ormond, allow all this to go on.
It's sadly ironic that just as there are 2 parcels of land at Ormond Beach under public ownership, enough public awareness at both local and state levels, and enough funding to begin restoring the wetlands, the prospect of massive nearby development again threatens the long-term potential of the area to function as habitat. Ormond Beach is currently still viable as habitat, meaning that it provides wildlife what it needs to forage and reproduce. There is no magic number for minimum acreage required to preserve habitat, just the assurance that every inch that reduces it, every step that increases human and pet traffic, reduces this potential to support wildlife. Development also threatens the other wetland functions that are critical to humans' ability to live on the coast. Functions that include flood prevention, biofiltration of stormwaters, beach replenishment, and nurseries for fish that humans enjoy eating. Ormond Beach may be the only coastal wetland in Southern California with the potential to survive anticipated effects of global warming. Rising ocean levels will cause all wetlands to migrate further inland. For most wetlands, that will mean migrating into parking lots, across roads and railway tracks, or into the foundations of buildings that have been built very close to the wetland perimeter. Seawalls that will be built to protect property will further marginalize species that live at the edge of the wetland. So it is up to us, with an ability to foresee these predicaments, to find ways to prevent the impacts that we can now predict with some degree of certainty. The coast belongs to all of us, and that us includes the non-human species that depend on coastal wetlands, marshes, dunes, and ungroomed beaches to survive.
So it benefits and enriches our lives because actually we can experience this, a place to go and see these things and understand that we must be optimistic. And the future, I think, restoration and the recovery of endangered species, one must be optimistic and believe we can do this. Otherwise, it's the wrong business to be in. And I've remained an eternal optimist, and so I believe we can do these things. And we can recover and preserve habitat for our endangered species and recover the populations of those that we have.